page number.
Okay, very good. So we're holding on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph on the bottom. Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. We started the Mishnah a couple of weeks ago, and last week we entered into a kind of a new area, extending the question of Ono, which we've now been talking about for quite some time. It's a fascinating discussion. But the Gemara opened up with the question of whether a person can disclaim Ono, price fraud, in advance and say that if there is price fraud, we're not going to adjust any prices. In other words, up till now we've been talking about you can't initiate price fraud, whether it's a third or a sixth. I mean, mostly shtus, but even according to Rabbi Tuvia, a third. Now the question is, okay, you know there's price fraud, or you suspect there's price fraud, but you're going to obviate it by saying in advance, if there's price fraud, it's not going to affect our transaction. That's a whole new arena that we opened up last week, and we're going to sort of pick up on that because there's some fascinating discussions on how we look at that. So that was how at the bottom when we said Itmar, the Gemara 4, 1, 2, 3, 5 lines from the bottom, it says, so then just to recount, there's a machloikes Rav and Shmuel, two Amoraim, great Amoraim. Rav says that if a person wants to discount price fraud in his terminology, you can't do it. Why? Because it's a halacha in the Torah, and you can't obviate a halacha in the Torah. Shmuel, on the other hand, says that if you do stipulate, you can. So we have to understand what Shmuel means, because the Chayra Rav may be right, because the Torah says it. And how do you go against, a clear Torah violation? So the Gemara wants to say, you know what? Maybe we can better understand this by looking at a machlokes tanoim between Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and then we'll link Rav and Shmuel to Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. What's the machlokes Rab Meir and Rabbi Yehuda? Different subject. If a man says to his wife or to his betrothed, he said, "I'm going to marry you, but on the condition that I'm not responsible to give you what the ksuba says." Share ksus v'oino, in other words, sustenance and clothing and marital protections, marital relations, all the things that the Torah says a man has to give to his wife. I'm going to annul that going forward. I'm not going to do it. Do you agree? If you don't agree, we don't have a marriage. So it's a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Very interesting machlokes. And again, along the lines of Rav and Shmuel, we see that Rabbi Meir says that you cannot violate a condition of the Torah, because the Torah says that in Shmos that a man has to give his wife share ksus v'oino, right? And Rabbi Yehuda says otherwise. So what does Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda says that you can on monetary matters. When the Torah says that monetary matters you have to abide by, says Rabbi Yehuda, there is a leniency inherent in that if his wife, in other words, the woman who is marrying him, agrees that you don't have to give me monetary share b'kesus, meaning sustenance, clothing, the things that are monetarily quantified, that I can give up. But when it comes to ono, which have to do with varim shebaguf, marital relations, or the things that a husband has to give to his wife that are non-monetary, that's even Rabbi Yehuda says you cannot give up. So the machlokes of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is really only about monetary matters. Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Meir that he cannot give up the physical relationship between husband and wife, but he can give up monetary relations. So the Gemara wants to say, we see Rav and Shmuel will hold like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. On its face, Rav will hold like Rabbi Meir. Both say you cannot. And Shmuel will hold like Rabbi Yehuda, both who say you can, except for the marital relation portion. But let's put that aside. So basically, Shmuel and Rabbi Yehuda agree that on monetary matters, because remember, Shmuel is talking about ono, price fraud, and Rabbi Yehuda is talking about share v'ksus, monetary compensation from the husband to the wife. And they're fully agreed that you can do that. So that's kind of where we left it off last week. It looks like that machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is on par with Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Okay, fine. So this is where we're going to pick up today, and we're going to go further into the discussion of whether or not, first off, the Gemara wants to make a claim that there's no machlokes at all, that Rav and Shmuel, that Rav can hold like Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel can hold like Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, they want to say, iron it all out, that everybody agrees with everybody else. In other words, even though Rav and Shmuel are disagreeing, but the machlokes Tanoim is not a machlokes parallel to Rav and Shmuel, because both Rav and Shmuel can hold like either Tana, which is an interesting phenomenon. We're going to learn right now why they say that, because l'chayra, it makes sense that Rav holds like Reb Meir to be more restrictive, and Shmuel, who says you can vitiate or obviate oinoah by announcing it and saying I'm not, we're not going to honor price fraud. He seems to hold like Rabbi Yehuda. How can he hold like Reb Meir? Reb Meir says you can't give up she'er v'ksus. You can't give up monetary consideration from a husband to a wife. How's he going to hold like Shmuel, who says you can? Anyway, so this is the question, and this is what we're going to get into right now to understand the machlokes. All right, so now we're going to say as follows. On the very bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, the very last line, the Gemara says, Omalach Rav, who is machmir, and says that you can't give up oinoah. In other words, you can't say, we're going to wipe out, price fraud in our situation. Meaning you have to accept l'chayra, meaning you have to accept price fraud. Ano amad afila Rabbi Yehuda, says Rav. I can even. Of course, he holds like Rabbi Meir because they say the same thing almost. But how did he hold like Rabbi Yehuda? Says the Gemara. Rav says, I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that what? That Rabbi Yehuda says that you can forgive share v'ksus.
Obligations.
Monetary gifts to the wife. You can forgive that. Why? Ad kan loy ka'omer Rabbi Yehuda Hossam. When Rabbi Yehuda said that you cannot, that you can give up share v'ksus, how is that? Ela deyoda v'komachla. Do you know why Rabbi Yehuda said that? Because she was aware. In other words, he said to her in so many words, I am not going to be bound by giving you share v'ksus. So even the Torah says she is that he has to give her share v'ksus, but she knows it and she's meichel. So Rabbi Yehuda, according to this version now, what we're saying is Rav is saying, I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda, because when Rabbi Yehuda says that she can give up share v'ksus, it's because she knows. In other words, she's cognizant of the fact that she's entitled to share v'ksus and gives it up knowingly. Says Rav, that Rabbi Yehuda agrees when you knowingly give up something that you have rights to, you're allowed to do it, even minat Torah. You hear what he's saying? In other words, even though the Torah says you have rights to share v'ksus for ona, so the question is, how do you give it up? The answer is you give it up because you know you have the rights, and you want to say, I'm giving up my monetary rights. I can't give up my physical rights, guf, so I can't give up and free you from for your obligation to me physically, but I can give up my right for you to give me money. Let's say I'm independent wealthy. I don't need your money. I don't want, whatever the reason. So Rav is saying that I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't bind her to the monetary obligation if she knows it and willingly gives it up. In other words, to look at it from a different perspective, when a person, even though the Torah says you have certain rights, I'm allowed to give up the rights if I am fully cognizant of them and say, I don't want the rights. That's Rabbi Yehuda's, that's what Rav is saying in Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda can hold like me. We all
What about the other component of the marriage, the physical part? Can a woman give up that?
You're right, that you can't give up. But to compare the monetary rights with Ono is monetary.
Right.
So the monetary right of Ono and the monetary right of Sher Viksus are on par. You're right. Forget about Ono, the physical part. But the comparison that we want to make is between money and money. Ono is a money issue, and Sher Viksus is a money issue. Says Rav, I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda. I'm not arguing on Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda will agree that on money matters he'll hold like me, that you can give him up. So in other words, the Gemara now is telling us that Rav really holds like both of them. Not only that, but let's go weiter. Ushmuel on the top of Nun Aleph Amid Beis. Okay, so in other words, so what Rav is saying, that you can give up something that you're aware of, right? But in the case of Ono, right? Abel Hocha, in the case of Ono, mi yada demachel. Who knows if there's Ono? In other words, what Rav is saying, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda can hold like me is because Rabbi Yehuda isn't going to argue in a case of monetary mechila, that if you know that there is a Torah prohibition and you vitiate it because you knowledgeably say, I don't want that protection, you're allowed to. But by Ono, says Rav, what does Rav say by Ono? You cannot give up your rights to Ono, to price fraud. Why can you not give up? Says the Gemara on top of Nunal from Beis, you can't give up something that you don't know if it exists. You don't know if there is Ono here. In other words, he's distinguishing between the ksuba, which you know, and Ono, which you don't know. Because this is a case of where a person says, what does the Brisa say? The Brisa says, the Brisa says, in the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, is if a man says, I am to his, in other words, he's lending money or giving money, and he says, or selling an item, and he says, but I'm not responsible for price fraud. For I know. Do we know if there's price fraud? No. We would only, one second, Michael, we'll only find out later if there's price fraud. Maybe. So if we don't know there's price fraud, says Rob, we can't give it up. You can only give up something that is bala olam, that is already existing, which is like sharing ksus. That's why he says Rabbi Yehuda can hold like me, because even though I am machmir and I say that I know you can't give up, that's because we don't know if there's Ono. But if we knew there was Ono, we could give it up. So therefore, Rav is saying Rabbi Yehuda holds like me. Yeah, Michael.
Well, I disagree with this position totally. Isn't it possible to say it's contingent on if Ono occurs, then I'm, even if Ono is involved, I'm giving it up regardless. So is that what the statement is? That I may not know it now, but if it turns out to be, then I'm relinquishing that right.
Okay, okay, hold that point. But that point will come up. But we're not at that. We're not there. Where we are right now is trying to draw a parallel between Rav and Rabbi Yehuda, and that parallel l'chayra you can't make because Rabbi Yehuda is mekel and Rav is machmir. So how do you get to bridge them? Says Rav, you know how I bridge them? I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Yehuda the Tana. Why? Because when it comes to monetary matters, even though the Torah says you can't do ono, and the Torah says you have to give your wife share of iksus, but if you know with specificity that you are entitled to share vixus, that I can give up. But the situation here is, and this is the point, Michael, the case we're dealing with is we don't know if there's ono when the transaction happens. When the transaction happens between the seller and the buyer, he's selling him an item. Later on, we find out it was ono. But at the time of the sale, we didn't know it was oino. Says Rav, that's why I'm machmir and oino, because at the time of the sale, we don't know. But at the time of the share vixus, we know that she's entitled to share vixus, and she is deliberately saying, I don't want it, which is why Rabbi Yehuda and I don't have a disagreement. Your point is different, and we'll get to that in a minute. In other words, but we don't know. The whole story of ono is at the time of the transaction, we don't know if there was price fraud. That only happens later. And if it happens later, the question is, can you undo something that happened earlier? Okay, then we have the halacha that says, depending on how much money, right? How much, more or less, equal, we have to accept that. But at the time of the transaction, we don't know if there's price fraud. Therefore, you can't give up something you don't know. That's why Rabbi Yehuda can hold like Rav, that even though in Oino you can't give it up, but in Share Vixus I can give it up because the wife knows it and she says, I don't want it. Okay, so that's clear. That's clear to us now. Now, we're going to flip the script and we're going to ask about Shmuel. Shmuel is the one who says that in Oino you can give up your rights to Ono in advance. In other words, at the time, if a person is about to I'm about to sell you, Michael, an item for $100, and I say to you, you may not claim price fraud on me for this transaction. And Shmuel says, yeah, you can give that up. You can give that up. And now he's going to come and say, Ano ama afilo Rab Meir. I can even hold like Rab Meir, who says what? That you cannot give up She'er Vixus, even if you know it. Rab Meir is machmir. And it says, the wife under no condition can give up what the Torah grants her. So Rab Meir is very machmir. So l'chayra, how does Rab Meir's position coalesce with Shmuel? Shmuel is giving up Oino at the moment of the transaction, and Rab Meir says a wife cannot give up monetary rights that the Torah gives her. Can't. So how do you reconcile? Says the Gemara, Shmuel Omer, and Shmuel says, Ano Amra Fila Rab Meir. I can even hold like Rab Meir, or Rab Meir can hold like me. In other words, we hold that monetary rights can be given up. Rab Meir says no. Says the Gemara, Ad kan lo kam Rab Meir hosam. The reason why Rab Meir says over there by Share Vixus that you cannot give it up, the Vadai Ko Aker, because the Torah says that you cannot give it up in so many words. What does the Torah say? Reb Meir says that if the Torah says you can't give up your specific right, you can't give up your specific right. That's why Reb Meir is machmir by she'er v'ksus, by the ksuba. Aval hacha, but in the case of price fraud, says Shmuel, mi yomedeka akamidi. Who says there's anything going on improper? So since, again, same principle, since we don't know by the case of shtus, whether or not, by oino, whether or not there is a problem, so Reb Meir is not going to create a problem and say that you can't say it. Say anything you want, but we don't know if there is a problem. So Reb Meir can agree with Shmuel that if a person says, remember just the words here, a person says to the buyer, there will be no price fraud claim in our situation. Okay, there's an expression in Yiddish, ate gezugt. All right, he said. What difference does it make what he said? There's no reality here. We don't know if there is a problem. So Shmuel is saying that when we don't know there's a problem, Reb Meir is not going to create a problem. Reb Meir will only say you can't do it when it's in front of us. she is entitled to she'er v'ksus, and he says, I'm not giving it to you. Reb Meir says, cannot be done. You can't take away what the Torah gives, not in monetary, not in non-monetary, but in things that have there's no clarity. We don't know. It's a davar shelo bo la'olam. It never happened yet. He can agree. So what the Gemara is telling us, and we'll ask you the question in a minute. So what the Gemara is telling us, both Rav and Shmuel are saying that the machlokes Reb Meir and Yehuda doesn't apply to them, because Rav can hold like Reb Yehuda and Shmuel can hold like Reb Meir. So there's no machlokes Tanoim to coalesce with the machlokes Amoraim. Okay, Michael.
So, Rabbi, I'm trying to understand Rabbi Meir's position. His position is, if I'm correct, and I may not be, the essence of the marriage contract involves monetary consideration.
Correct.
So therefore, you can't do anything to negate that, because that's the essence of the contract. It is part and parcel of the
part and
contract.
parcel. I mean, there's a non-monetary portion too, but there's a monetary portion. Yes.
However, I guess this is Shmuel's argument. The onah can still be in there because of the value of the monetary amount. So at this point,
no. Shmuel is saying that the reason why Reb Meir can agree with me is because we don't know if there is onah. So why are we making it up and saying that Reb Meir is going to argue with me? We don't know if there's onah. Maybe there's no onah here at all.
I didn't state it well enough, but
yeah.
So at this point there isn't. But if there were, or at the point it comes, that's a different issue, and obviously he may agree with that, but it's still not enough to undo that essence of the contract. So isn't onah, then it's just suspended until if and when it becomes an issue?
In essence, you're right. In essence, it's not an issue today, may never be an issue, which is why Reb Meir and I don't argue, says Shmuel, because there is a big difference. Remember, we're trying to place the machlokes Tanoim in the same space as the machlokes Amoraim. Now, the machlokes of Oinah is the same as the machlokes in She'er v'ksus v'ona, and all Shmuel is saying is they're not the same, because in the case of She'er v'ksus, it's on the face of it a violation of the Torah law, but onah, on the face of it, there's no violation because there's no onah here.
But if there was,
right. So,
there would be
then there would be a potential problem. Exactly right.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes, exactly. You're exactly right.
I'm more confused than before.
Okay, go ahead, Jay.
These are financial obligations in the ksuba.
Right.
How do you get fraud? I don't understand. Where's the fraud?
No,
the obligation.
No. There's no fraud in that, Jay. What we're saying is we have the Tanoim back in their time had a machlokes Reb Meir Rabbi Yehuda whether a woman can give up rights the Torah gave her.
Right.
That was a machlokes Reb Meir Rabbi Yehuda, and fine. Each one took a position. A couple of 100 years later, okay, whenever it was in time, the great Rav and Shmuel were having a machlokes about a totally different matter, whether or not a person who is involved in a monetary transaction with someone else can make an explicit statement that price fraud will not apply to our situation. Has nothing to do with the ksuba, just a different story entirely. The Gemara now, in hindsight, says, you know what? That machlokes Reb Meir Rabbi Yehuda a couple of 100 years ago is quite the same machlokes as Rav and Shmuel now, even though they're on parallel stories. One is talking about a ksuba, one is talking about onah, but it's the same machlokes. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. So now, okay, you get right, Jay. We're clear there. Then it's comes the Gemara now. So here's the key. Comes the Gemara now, and Rav and Shmuel, who were a couple 100 years later, are saying, you know what? Our machlokes is not the same as Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. That machlokes was specifically dealing with an Iser d'Oraisa, with a Torah violation, which was in front of us. It was there materially in front of us. Why? Because he says to her, I'm not giving you She'er V'Ksus, and she says, okay, and that you can't have because the Torah is protecting her against herself, that she's not allowed to say, I give it up. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Yehuda says she can give it up. She's a woman of intelligence, and she doesn't need or want She'er V'Ksus. She can give it up. That's a clear machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. But Rav and Shmuel, a couple hundred years later, are dealing with a different Iser d'Oraisa, an Iser d'Oraisa that doesn't have the same consistency as that of She'er V'Ksus. What is their machlokes? Their machlokes is the Torah says that you may not charge price fraud. And all of a sudden, Rav says, you better believe you can't charge price fraud. If you say, I'm going to obviate price fraud, it's as if you said nothing. And Shmuel says, wait a minute. You can't deny him to say price fraud when there is no price fraud in front of us. You remember we had these discussions in the different Gemara about whether or not Davar Shelo Bola Olam, a thing that is not yet in existence, can be legislated. Can we legislate about something that hasn't happened yet? Oh, it may happen in the future, so we're going to make halachas. How can you do that? It hasn't happened. So let's consider as this discussion of Ainah is never happened yet. It may not happen. Why are we legislating something that isn't happen? It doesn't happen. Just because the man said, I'm not going to honor price fraud, doesn't mean that if there's price fraud, something will materialize. So just because he said it, that's what I said, Otte Gezuk. So he said, what's the big deal? He said it. So the Gemara wants to say you can't draw a parallel between Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, because one is on the face of it an Iser d'Oraisa, and the other is speculation on an Iser d'Oraisa. And speculation on an Iser d'Oraisa isn't the same. That's simply what the Gemara is saying here.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just trying to think this through. The example you give, which is to legislate something that may or may not happen in the future.
Correct.
But here with Onah, the transaction's happening now. In other words, we may not discover until a few days later because you go to an expert and you find out that what you paid was you grossly overpaid for the item. Right. But the transaction's happening today. The fact that you may not discover till later,
that's a good question.
Doesn't mean that didn't happen now when you're making the statement.
We're going on the knowledge, not on the actual facts.
Okay.
The underlying facts are the underlying facts, but the knowledge of the facts are not known to us today. So when someone says, I'm not going to honor Onah, it's a throwaway. It's just words, right?
So Onah is not Onah until it's discovered.
That's
as opposed
correct.
to when as opposed to the time of the transaction. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's why I compared it to Davar Shelo Bola Olam, because it has to be material to us in the moment. And lahavdil, Yale, when you want to take a case to court and you want to say, is there jurisdiction? Well, is there jurisdiction? Nothing happened. How are you going to go to court and argue on something that didn't happen yet? In other words, it's not ripe to have happened. So you can't run to court and say, wait a minute, he said that he's not going to honor Onah. Who is hurt? Who is hurt here? There's no Onah. We don't know there's Onah. Wait till it happens, and then maybe you have a case. So the Gemara simply wants to draw a parallel between the two cases, and that's why. I mean, we're going to go beyond this in a minute. So, okay, this is just a preliminary. But in our point in time, Rav and Shmuel are not arguing the same argument as Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. It's that simple. Right?
Interesting.
Rabbi,
Okay.
Rabbi, just one more ingredient for the confusion. Both terms are Onah, but they're completely different. We're talking about Onah in one case, we're talking about Onah in another case. They're spelled differently, but they sound the same. So when
They sound the same, right?
But there's no fraud involved in the Onah, which goes with the She'er V'Ksus. That's on the marital rights.
Right.
There's no fraud involved there. but there is involved the other. They happen to
Right. Okay. Yeah.
two machloks and
Rabbi, not to politicize the shiur, but basically, so if neither the buyer nor the seller ever claims fraud, then no fraud ever took place.
It never happened.
It never happened.
It never happened.
And yet somebody's out $350 million. I'm just
exactly right, but it never.
Just throwing that in there.
But it never happened.
Got it. Got it.
Right. Okay. So we understand each other. Now, there's an interesting side script to this, which there's a discussion in the Rishonim with regard to sharing ksus, which isn't material right away, but just as a thought that if there's a machlokes whether or not if a person says to his betrothed, "I'm not giving you share ksus," and later on he gives her share ksus, whether or not he fulfills the mitzvah of share ksus, or because he denied it, he's just giving her gifts that are not what the Torah says he must give. You hear that? There's such a machlokes that when a person denies her the share ksus, which is a mitzvah midaraisa, that he no longer gets the mitzvah if he gives it to her later, because he's just not giving her what the Torah says. He wants to give her stam zachen, big deal. He wants to give her a lot of gifts, but it's not share ksus because he denied her the share ksus. There is such a machlokes, which is fascinating because you think, all right, so he stepped back and now he's giving her share ksus. Teretz is he already made his bed, and now he has to live in it. He has to sleep in it. So he's going to give her gifts, but not al shem share ksus. Just a little sidelight to think about the how much the Torah says you have to not violate the words of the Torah by denying her what the Torah says. If the Torah says it, there was a reason why they said you have to give her share ksus. Now, in today's environment, or in environments where women take a different position on the relationship between husband and wife, right? So, so the woman will say, "What do you mean the Torah says? Why is the Torah protecting me with share ksus?" Right? Maybe I want to give share ksus to my husband. Maybe I want to give him share ksus instead of him giving me share ksus. But again, we're talking about how the Torah looks at the relationship between a husband and wife. It doesn't say ki yikach isha es ish. It says ki yikach ish es isha. And the whole Gemara Kedushin is very medactic on the question, and again, I'm not going to get into it, of whether or not, if there is a betrothal of man to woman and woman to man at the same time, whether Kedushin is chal. This whole question of husband to wife, wife to husband, is a very specific halacha, and you have to be very careful. Again, I'm not going to go into all the halachas here, but if there is a if only a woman said to a man, "Harayat mekadeshesli," halachically, there's no marriage. Is there a marriage when he says Harayat mekadeshes and she says Haray atom mekudeshli? Is there such a metzias that she is saying you're betrothed to me at the same time, whether or not there is a halachic marriage? Whole big story. Not for now, but you have to understand that. Why do I say it? Because we can't minimize what the Torah says. If the Torah said, according to according to Reb Meir, but even that you can't give up your rights. There are Torah rights. How do you give up what the Torah says you're entitled to? It's only Rabbi Yehuda who says, you know what? You're only giving up the money portion. That's not what the Torah meant. What the Torah really meant is you can't give up you can't give up the physical relationship between a husband and wife. That you can never give up. So, but you see that there are great Tanoim who argue that question as to whether or not what did the Torah mean when it said share ksus va'ona. So again, there's a lot to say here, but for our purposes, right now we're gonna make the point that share ksus is one set of rules, oino is another set of rules, and according to Rav and Shmuel, we can formulate a position where everybody holds like everybody, and it's kumbaya. There's no machlokes tanoim in the Amoraim. That's where we are right now.
But he has to give the Shev honor. He has to give that at the time they get married. And if he delays it, and you're saying that if he delays it and doesn't,
no. Shev Ksus is an ongoing. It's not a one-time under the chuppah requirement. He's pledging to her that
Right.
for the life of the marriage, he is going to protect her, give her sustenance, give her clothing, all the things that he's obligated to give.
But if he didn't do it for a while, you said if he starts to do it later, it doesn't work.
You mean if he
It's
didn't give her
later on?
No. If he says I will only marry you if you give up the right to the sustenance, and she says fine, and then later on he decides to start giving her the sustenance after all, I think the question you were asking, Rabbi, is, or the machlokus is, does that now qualify as him being Mekayim the mitzvah, or is he at this point simply making a gift? I think that's the point he's talking about.
That's exactly the machlokes. The machlokes is whether, having already vitiated his obligation,
right? She waived her right to
He
sustenance.
waived her right,
and
yes.
then later on, like Jay said, and then later on he says, you know what, that's not right. I really should take care of you.
Right.
Right.
So
Does he get the mitzvah?
Can we resuscitate the? Yeah. So Jay, to your question, can we resuscitate the Shev Ksus? Or it's very nice. He's giving her gifts, fine, but he's not giving her what the Torah mandated he do. That's okay. That's a different story. He can give her and shower her with gifts, but it's not Shev Ksus. It's Sam.
Rabbi,
yeah.
If I could, in terms of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that she can waive the right to the sustenance
on monetary matters.
On monetary, is he saying that obligation is not a Torah obligation, or is he saying there's a Torah obligation, but this is apparently there are Torah obligations that people can waive their right to if they choose to? Because that's a big concept.
He's saying that the Torah gave that obligation to protect her, but if she's saying I waive my right to that protection for whatever reason, the Torah will not punish her. There's no punishment for saying I give up that right. But if she willingly said I give up the right to Oinah, she can't give that up. She can't come and say I give up my right to any physical relationship with my husband. That's contra to what. In other words, even Rabbi Yehuda, who's Mekel, is not Mekel by Oinah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. So we boiled it down now to the question of whether or not is there really a machlokes Tanoim and Amoraim on this sort of greater subject. That's where we're holding in the Gemara. So now, we're not going to immediately answer that question, but that's the question. Because everybody's saying, I can hold like everybody. Says the Gemara, now the Gemara is going to focus on Shmuel first. And what is the Gemara going to say? The Gemara says, Omar Ravanon, comes Ravanon and he says, Lididi mefarsheli minei demar Shmuel. I heard these words from Shmuel. In other words, I had a discussion with Shmuel, and I knew there was a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and this is what I understand directly from Shmuel is the discussion. What is that? Let's look very carefully. It all depends. I'm going to use a word which is very controversial in today's society. It's how you nuance the words. It's how you nuance the words is what is the issue here. What do I mean? If one person says to his friend, I'm going to make a transaction here, a monetary transaction, but here, look, almanas she'ein lecho olai oino. You have no claim of price fraud against me. Those are the words he's using specifically. So when he says that beferish, says Shmuel, ein lo anav ono. Then there is no price fraud. If he said to the buyer, you can't have a claim on me. I'm selling you for $100. I don't care. I don't even know if that's the right number. But let's just say you come back to me and it turns out that I overcharged you. You have no claim of ano against me. Says Shmuel, ein lo alav ano. He has no ano on him. None. But here's the nuanced words. Ad. Al menashe ein bo anoah, on the condition that there is no anoah in this transaction. There was no word olai. He made a sweeping statement. This transaction is valid on the condition that there is no onah inherent in the deal. Then, hariyesh bo onah. If it turns out that there was onah, then we're saying he didn't disclaim any onah. He just says, I don't know. So I'm going to throw out there that this transaction is valid unless there's onah. I don't know if there's onah, but I'm just going to say if there is onah.
It depends on what is.
It depends. Exactly. It depends on manos alai. In other words, if you say no matter what happens in the world, you have no claim against me. He's saying in so many words that onah doesn't exist in this transaction. Forget about the term onah. We're just making a transaction, and you hang your hat on the fact that we've already discussed many exceptions to onah, right? If you're not a public seller, if you're a private seller, you sell it in the state rather than in a retail. All these other conditions. There's no onah, so you see, onah is a fungible matter. It's not one size fits onah. If there's onah, there's onah, there's onah. No, onah is specific. The Torah says you can't do onah, but inherent in the Torah's halacha, there are exceptions. Already in the Torah's law, there are exceptions. So if you say, almanas, there is no onah on me, alai, then you can't come back to me. But if you say, almanas, there isn't onah, not olai, but just that there isn't onah somewhere hovering in this transaction, then if we discover onah, then there is onah. That's what Shmuel is clarifying to Rav Hanan. Shmuel is the lenient one, right? We just said Shmuel is the lenient one. He says that you can give up rights to onah. Shmuel is telling Rav Hanan that depends on how it was said. Yes, I agree you can give up onah, but that's only if you say the magic words. Amanas she'en olai, she'en l'cha olai onah. But if you don't say alai onah, then onah isn't given up. It isn't wiped out. That's a very important concept now that we understand in Shmuel. That Shmuel is restricting his generous position of no onah, depending on how it's nuanced. So you see, nuancing does matter in certain circumstances because words matter. It's how you say and what you mean. So we're saying that if you say almas olai, you mean olai. That no matter whether there is or isn't onah, you can't have a taina on me, and I can't have a taina on you.
Rabbi, would that conflict with Rabbi Meir?
Would that conflict with Rabbi Meir's? Yes, of course it would, because Rabbi Meir's position exactly because Rabbi Meir is talking about she'er v'ksus, and there is no nuancing in she'er v'ksus. She'er v'ksus is that all day long, right? I mean, so in other words, Rabbi Meir takes a strong position on she'er v'ksus. The machlokes, but Michael, the machlokes in she'er v'ksus is a machlokes of whether the Torah was as mandating on the wife in monetary matters as in non-monetary matters. It's kind of a different scope. And the machlokes is, Rabbi Meir says the Torah meant money as much as it meant physical relationship. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no, money is different than physical relationship because money is something that a person knowingly can give up, but knowingly you can't give up, I know. That's the crux of the machlokes is whether knowingly you can give up money vis-a-vis oina'ah. Rabbi Meir says you cannot, and Rabbi Yehuda says you can.
But Shmuel says you can if you stipulate it this way.
That's correct. But because remember, Shmuel is not talking about she'er v'ksus. Right. He's talking only about onah. In other words, not every Torah edict is alike. If the Torah says something specific in one case, you can't extrapolate that that's what the Torah means in every case when the Torah says in bold letters, you may not do something, right? In other words, you have to look at the details. It's not just Aseres Adibras, it's the Mishpatim. What are the Mishpatim behind the Aseres Adibras? And that's why Torah oral tradition, the Torah Shebaal Peh, is so important, because we maintain that from the Torah Shebiksav alone, you would not be able to totally glean the understanding of what the Torah means. In other words, maybe I said this once before. I had a law partner once who was he was a very, very smart guy, and he was really quite extraordinary. And he once said to me, and he learned Torah. He did learn Torah, but he once said to me the following words, which I think he said, when I learn Torah and I look at Rashi, I can disagree with Rashi, and I don't have to hold like Rashi. I can make up my own interpretation of the Torah. So Rashi, I'm not bound by the oral Torah, is what he's saying. So I said, he said that we have nothing to discuss. If you're not bound by what I believe the Torah tells us, then let's have a nice discussion, but it has nothing to do with the Torah. Because our tradition is that the Torah Shebaal Peh is as important as the Torah Shebiksav, because without it, we don't understand the Torah Shebiksav. He's telling me, I understand the Torah Shebiksav as well as Rashi. So I can give my interpretation. I mean, it's kind of I say it because that's how people look. Okay, there's 10 commandments, so that's it. Okay, so my interpretation of the 10 Commandments can be different than your interpretation of the 10 Commandments. Okay, fine. If that's the case, then we can have an idle discussion. We can't talk about halacha. But again, I make that point to really emphasize the fact that that's why the great Reb Meir and the great Rabbi Yehuda had to elucidate to us. If we didn't have Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and I said to you, there's a Torah halacha of Sheiksus Va'ina, can a woman give up that right? And without knowing, you say, of course she can't give up the right. The Torah gave her that right. It's a right she has. How can she give it up? The Torah says you have to give it. But now we understand that there is a man d'Omer, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that what the Torah meant by Sherik Sisla, the emphasis was on all three, but on Oina you can't give up, and Sherik Sis you can give up. Would I have known that otherwise, if not for Rabbi Yehuda? I mean, you can't make it up, right? Can you have on your own have said that was the interpretation? We wouldn't have known that. Comes the Torah, comes Rabbi Yehuda and tells us that's pshat. Now, again, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, we know that Rabbi Meir is more machmir. Rabbi Yehuda is more makel. That's usually the way it is. And Rabbi Yehuda was later than Rabbi Meir, so we say that he understood Rabbi Meir, but in the tradition of halacha, we go by the latter. In other words, the later in halacha, we say is the more current understanding. Because Rabbi Meir, although they were somewhat contemporary, they overlap, but Rabbi Meir was older than Rabbi Yehuda. So the question is, did they each understand each other's position fully to accept what each one was saying? So of course we say a muktim a mucher, but at the same time we have to understand. Sometimes we come to the point where we say teku, right? We come to a machlokes that we can't. We can't break we can't break the code. We can't understand, so we say teku. We have to acknowledge that we don't understand, and we have to wait for Eliyahu Navi. Okay, fine. But by the way, why Eliyahu Navi? Because I think we said because the Torah tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu had a query on halacha, and was Pinchas who came and was able to elucidate to Moshe what the halacha was. So the Torah tells us, Pinchas zuhi Eliyahu. Pinchas Eliyahu is the reincarnation. Eliyahu is Pinchas. So Pinchas will be the decider. Pinchas, because he was able to help Moshe Rabbeinu, becomes the decider, and Eliyahu Navi, who is Pinchas, comes and will break the machlokes and teku. It's a beautiful thought. So in other words, where we don't know, we have to go by. Moshe is the greatest Navi of all time, but it was Pinchas who pushed him over the end line. So we give Pinchas that grace. Anyway, again, fascinating discussion, but we see this machlokes, and here Shmuel is telling Rav Hanan When I say price fraud, understand what I mean. Amanas she'en lecho olai oino, or just amanas she'en lo ano. So we're now bifurcating Shmuel into two different positions. Okay. Now, having said that, let's go back to our original thought. We'll finish up here. The original thought is there a machlokes tanoim on the same machlokes as the machlokes hamaroim, right? And right before this, we said, no, Rav says I can hold like Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel says I can hold like Rabbi Meir. So maybe there isn't a machlokes. Okay, here we go into the home stretch. Frek the Gemara Meisaveh. So now we're going to ask a kasha, which hopefully may help us break the logjam of understanding. What's the kasha? In other words, we know what we say here in the Mishnah, right? Hanoise v'hanoisein ba'amona. There is a brisa which says as follows: If I come to you and I say to you, I want you to be my shliach and sell my goods. Go into the marketplace and sell my goods. I am not going to constrain you on what price you should ask. Whatever price you ask, that's what I will accept. Here, in other words, I don't know what the price is, but you're a smart guy, and I know I can trust you. So Reuven says to Shimon, Shimon, be my shaliach. Go into the marketplace, start selling my goods. And whatever you get, I'll pay you a fee for your time, and you'll give me the proceeds. That's this brisa. Hanoise v'hanoisim ba'amona. Right? So he's selling it to him that way. Now, here we get into the fine print. But what does he say to him? You have no claim on me, or I on you, for oino. In other words, you, Shimon, are going to sell it, but if you come back to me and sell it for $100, and it turns out that it was $125, you can't come back to me, you, Shimon, can't come back to me and say, I undersold it, you got to give me more money than the fee you promised me, because that's the way it is. Or vice versa, if the seller finds out later that I'm sorry, in other words, for a buyer, it would be the other way around. In other words, if it turns out that he sold it for 100 and it really sold in the marketplace for 80, then he has no, the shaliach can't come back and say, I made you 20% more than the price. You should give me money to make up the difference over and above the fee. Or if the seller made the windfall of 125 to 100, then there's no taina of price fraud the other way. In other words, in a case where the shaliach is getting a fixed fee, right? He's getting a fixed fee, and he says, "Amanas she'ein lecho olai ono," the magic words, "Amanas she'ein lecho olai ono," no ono. That's what we said before in Shmuel, right? We said that in Shmuel, that Shmuel distinguished between ein lecho olai ono or ein boy ono. So this brisa is saying, there's two cases in the brisa. The first is where I gave it to my shaliach to sell, and I said the words ein lecho olai ono, then there's no claim. But if I said ein loy oilov ono, right? In other words, the brisa is saying a different form of words. He's saying that the condition is that there is no price fraud. There is no price fraud. Again, hanoisim v'hanoisim ba'amona. He is trading with him on a fee. He's giving him a fee to sell for him. The guy goes ahead and sells in the marketplace and comes back with the merchandise, with the money. Now, the brisa says, if Reuven said to Shimon before he sent him into the marketplace, on the condition that there is no price fraud, then there is no price fraud. On the condition ein lecho olav ana, in the second case, there's also no price fraud. So this brisa is telling us whether he said ein lecho olay ana or he said ein lo oinav hana, there's no price fraud.
Rabbi, I don't understand the case.
Okay.
So if I'm an agent for a seller,
Right.
I have not bought these on consignment, so I'm an intermediary for the seller and the buyer.
Correct.
So the buyer should have recourse against the original seller because he's disclosing that he's an agent for the seller. And if that price is what he's selling it for, and it turns out to be a no, he can't, the intermediary agent cannot waive it off.
Okay.
So unless you're talking about a case where he buys the goods from the seller and sells them, then that's a different case because the relationship is directly between the agent and the buyer. But otherwise, how can he say to the agent, the buyer doesn't have any recourse against me?
Okay.
If
You're
that's
looking.
because they found out there was fraud, right, Michael?
No. But Michael, let me isolate. You're asking about the end buyer, the guy in the marketplace who's buying from Shimon, right? That's your question?
Well, I'm asking, what is the role of the agent? Is he a buyer or is he representing? You said an agent for the seller. So he discloses, I'm selling for so and so, and here's the price that I'm selling. And if it turns out that it is no, the ultimate buyer will come back to the seller.
Is he an agent of the seller or the buyer? I thought it was the buyer.
Right. So let me clarify. Okay, I understand your question, but let me clarify. This brisa, we're focusing not. Okay, there's Reuven and Shimon, right? Reuven, Shimon, and then there's a Levi out in the street who is buying from Shimon.
Yeah.
Forget about Levi. Levi is not part of this discussion. I think that's what you're trying to say. Levi is not part of this discussion. The discussion is simply between Reuven and Shimon. Is there price fraud if Shimon is getting a flat fee and he gives the Reuven a windfall? Does he have a taina against Reuven? I gave you a windfall.
That I understand, but you said an agent, which means he's representing the seller. So between the two of them, I understand you're waiving it off.
And that's what this price is
entitled to anything more, nor is the seller entitled to go back to the agent and say, you didn't get enough for me, so you owe me money, because they're both expressing to each other there's no in our transaction.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't understand because I thought we were talking about in holistically, not between the two of them.
I thought it was different. I thought some person, he's a farmer out in the boondocks, he hires an agent to go to town and buy something for him on the condition that the price he's buying it at doesn't include a rip-off fraud. That's what I thought it was.
Right. And in that situation, the guy out in the boondocks cannot claim price fraud against the agent who bought it or in the marketplace because he said ein lecho alay ono. There is no ono between us. Forget about the third guy. There's no ono between us because I'm giving you carte blanche to do what you do, and I will live with it. I'll live with it up and I'll live with it down.
He says, I just need it back here. I don't care what it costs.
That's it. That's it.
So that's the case.
Okay, but why is this price important? Now, so having said that, what do we see? We see that when a person says in so many words, Al Menashe ein lecho olay oino, that you have no oino on me, meaning me and you and me, that there's no oino at all between us, says the Gemara, l'Rav de Omar, according to Rav that says, Ano de Amra fila Rabbi Yehuda, that I hold even according to Rabbi Yehuda, that what? That Rabbi Yehuda and I don't disagree, because Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a situation that is in having to do with Sher V'Ksus, and therefore the halacha is different. But I'm talking about Oino. So now the kasha is, if who is the Tana of the Bryce of this Mishnah? Is it Reb Meir or is it Reb Yehuda? Because now that we say he can hold like both, we have to understand who the Tana of the Mishnah is. It's one thing for us to say that Rav can hold like Reb Yehuda and he can hold like Reb Meir, but the Mishnah itself is either Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. The kasha of this here is, so who is the Tana of the Mishnah? If we're saying that, according to Rav, there is now no distinction between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, that he can hold like both, then who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Is it Reb Meir or is it Reb Yehuda? It can't be both.
It has to be Rav.
In other words, let me put it this differently. If we know that, let's say we know that Reb Meir says this, Reb Yehuda says this, it's clear in the Mishnah. But if I come along and I say, no, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, it's not that clear that there is a difference between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. And then you ask me, so who is the Mishnah? Is it Reb Meir or Reb Yehuda? And you're clearing, I don't know, wait a minute. That's a good question. Is it Reb Meir or Reb Yehuda? I'm saying there's no difference between them. If in Rav's view, who's an Amora, he says that he holds like Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, now we want to look back at the Mishnah itself and say, who is the Mishnah, Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda?
Because it
Rav
can't
is saying
be both. It can't be
it's both. Rav is saying it's both, and you can't have that. So the
Right.
Gemara asks a good kasha. In Rav's eye, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Reb Meir. You're telling me that Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda are saying the same thing. That can't be. There is a Reb Meir in the Mishnah and there's a Reb Yehuda in the Mishnah. Who is the Mishnah going like? It's a fundamental question that you want to reconcile the Mishnah that there's no machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, but the Mishnah says there is a machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. In other words, we're asking sort of a question in time, because the Amoraim were much later. So in real time, the Tanoim, some held like Reb Meir, some held like Reb Yehuda. We now are fast forward 100, 200 years later, and we're doing a machlekes in another subject, and we want to extrapolate that Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, when they had that machlekes, they really were mechavan to the machlekes that we have today. And we're saying that Reb Yehuda holds like one and Shmuel holds like the other. And Reb Yehuda says, no. I come out like Reb Meir and I come out like Reb Yehuda. No machlekes. But Rav, how can you say that you come out like Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda when in real time there was a machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda? You can't later say, Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, they don't argue. You can't say that 200 years later. So according to you, Rav, based on this brisa, who is the Tana of the Mishnah? Is it Reb Meir or is it Reb Yehuda? That's the kasha on Rav. Because remember, we put aside the discussion of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda and Rav and Shmuel to ask a question, what does Shmuel mean? And we said that Shmuel means that there is a distinction in the verbiage. Al Menashe ein lecho alai ano, or Al Menashe ein bo ano. So if Shmuel makes that distinction in what you utter, right, in the words, then look at the brisa, which was contemporaneous with the Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir, and tell me what that brisa says. That brisa basically says that if I hire someone on trust as an agent, then there's no difference between ein lecho onai ono and Menashe ein lecho onai ono. In both cases, there is no ono. Oh, if you say that, then Rav, then who do you hold like? If that's the case, that there's no difference, then what really was the machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda? Explain it to me, if there was no difference. So that's what the Gemara is really asking here, and we'll stop here because it gets very interesting. But now you understand the kasha is that when you want to extrapolate a machlekes, even Rishonim and Achronim, but certainly Tanoim and Amoraim, and you want to say that they're on all fours, that the machlekes Tanoim is the machlekes Amoraim, and they're interchangeable, then you have to ask yourself this kasha, because if there was a consistent machlokes between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Rav and Shmuel, and Reb Meir always hold like Rav and Rabbi Yehuda always holds like Shmuel, okay, then there's no problem. The Tana of the Mishnah according to Rav is Reb Meir, and the Tana of the Mishnah according to Shmuel is Rabbi Yehuda, because that's consistent. But the minute you cross lines and you say that Rav can really reconcile Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel can as well, then you have to go back and ask the fundamental question. So if everybody holds like everybody else, what's the machlokes? Okay, I mean, it's kind of rhetorical, but that's in essence what this kasha is who does he hold like? So next week, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to get into that and understand why there really is a machlokes. But the takeaway here is, at this point in time, is that we're puzzled how Rav can decide who the Tana of the Mishnah is when he says he holds like both. You can't hold like both when the Tanoim argue against each other. I mean, very fundamentally, if I and you disagree, someone can't come along and say, I agree with Jay and I agree with Tuvia, because we all agree. But we don't agree. You and I just disagreed.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So that's the beauty of it here, is that we have to understand why Rav is saying, who's the Tana of the Mishnah? If everybody holds like me, then I don't know who's the Tana of the Mishnah. Anyway, that's the discussion. So Mitzvah Hashem, next week we're going to focus on that, and we're trying to understand what the Gemara is. That's why it's a continuum. We have to keep going. All right.
I appreciate the depth of brilliance intellectually to be able to come up with these questions like this.
Right. Exactly.
Generations later.
Right. Exactly right. So in other words, how do we understand the fundamental machlokes if Rav is saying there isn't a machlokes?
Yeah.
A Tana and a Mora can't undo what a Tana said 150 years earlier. He's got to abide by what the Tana says. And if the Tana's argued and you want to come and reconcile the Tanoim and both Tanoim, then you're taking a dangerous step forward, because you're saying they never argued, but they did argue. They have diametrically opposed positions. Anyway, we'll review that part of it, and then we'll go back to Mitzvah Hashem next week.
Thank you.